Urtica gracilis. The nickname for this plant is Hairy Savage. This is part 1, and in part 2 I'll be sharing a mnemonic or memory technique to help you commit to memory the most distinguishing characteristics of this plant for identifying purposes. Be sure to watch all of part 1 so the part 2 is understandable. This is a weedy plant. It's erect, 3 to 7 feet tall. The leaves are opposite of one another along the stem. Here in this picture you can see, illuminated by the light, some of the fine hairs along the main stem here. You'll also find these fine hairs along the leaf stem, which can be up to an inch long. And for this particular nettle plant, there are some lookalikes, but for this particular nettle plant we're studying, common name is slender nettle. You'll find the fine hairs only on the bottom surface of the leaves. If you find the identical plant with wider leaves and hairs on the top and bottom surface, they're interchangeable for eating and for medicinal purposes. There's really no distinction when it comes to the use. Both are used identically. The main stem is stout. This is a picture of its lookalike, the wider leaf nettle. Another distinction, just as a technicality, the mnemonic will help you to, will give you all the details or the characteristics you need to distinguish the plant we're studying from any of its lookalikes, the edible lookalikes or poisonous lookalikes. But anyway, just FYI, as a technicality, you'll notice that the leaves here of its more wide leaf nettle lookalike is here at the base of the leaf, where you see it has a deeper heart shape. They call this being cordate. That's a botanical name or a scientific term in botany. Cordate meaning heart-shaped. You'll also find fine hairs on the top surface of this as well as the bottom surface. On both plants you'll find stipules. These are leaf-like appendages which grow from where the main stem meets the leaf stems. You'll find these appendages, stipules, leaf-like. Now these stipules eventually grow into the drooping long clusters of seeds of flowers, as we see here. These long drooping clusters can grow up to 3 inches long. This is, again, is one of the I would say this is one of the lookalikes, the more wide leaf nettle. Slender leaf nettle. The slender leaves, also the slender leaf nettle also has a tendency to fold, as you see here. Not always, but here in this case it's obvious. The seeds are very tiny. They're about 1 to 1.5 millimeters across. As you can see, they're green and they'll eventually turn into greenish white flowers. The flowers can also be reddish brown, as we'll see later. Opposite leaves, stout main stem, erect, 3 to 7 feet tall. The top side and bottom side of the leaves have deep veins or very prominent veins. The edge of the leaves are deeply serrated or coarse, have coarse teeth. The tip is very pointed. Sharp point. Stout main stem, stipules. Here in this case, you'll see the stipules as well as the drooping clusters of flowers. This picture gives me an opportunity to tell you the 4 characteristics of any of the nettle plants, the broadleaf, common nettle, or the slender nettle, distinguishing them from their lookalikes, whether the lookalikes be edible or poisonous. Those 4 characteristics are, and which by the way will be part of the mnemonic coming up in part 2, are the opposite leaves. The leaves are opposite. That's one characteristic. Okay, that none of the lookalikes will have. Let me back up and say this. None of the lookalikes will have all 4 of these characteristics on the same plant, but the nettles do have these 4 characteristics on the same plant. And these 4 characteristics again are: 1, opposite leaves; 2, the stems have ridges or ribs longitudinally along the main stem; 3, they have the stipules, or if you don't see the stipules, then of course you'll see the long drooping clusters of seeds or flowers; and 4, they have hair on the stem. Hairs, stipules, opposite leaves, ridges, ribs, all covered in the mnemonic. Many other distinctions or many other distinguishing characteristics of these plants, but those are the main 4 you really have to remember. Mnemonic helps you to do that, to distinguish it from its lookalikes. This is a microscopic photo or picture of the hairs. They are hollow, and inside are chemicals which cause an irritation to the skin. This irritation can last a few hours to a few days, by the testimony of some people. And on the fact sheet, it is covered ways to alleviate that irritation. In most cases, it will resolve on its own. Or I should say, in all cases, it will resolve on its own. Hairs, the stipules, leaf-like. The stem is also hollow. Here we see the leaf of the hairy savage, or the slender leaf nettle. Notice the veins emanating from this one point. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 veins emanating from this central point. It's important for you to recognize that in order to distinguish it from one of its lookalikes. We have a picture of that coming up here in a later slide, coming up here at some time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Not always will we see 6, but it certainly will be more than 3. Deep, coarse, serrated teeth around the edges, lance-shaped leaves, sharp point, as distinguished from one of its edible lookalikes, catnip. Rounded tip of the leaf on the catnip. Again, pointed tip of leaf of the stinging nettle, whether it's common or the slender nettle. This picture reminds me of what is featured on the mnemonic, a hairy savage. He's going to be carrying a spear, and at the tip of his spear, you want to picture this. It's a lance, and it's serrated, and you'll be using these serrations to cut some of that hair off of this hairy beast, or this hairy person, or this hairy savage, however you want to imagine that in your mind, in order to help you to remember it. Now, this is one of its lookalikes. This is the leaf of a false nettle, which are poisonous or toxic. Turn it over and to view the bottom, and you'll see only 3. It looks like a bird's foot. Only 3 veins emanating from the main stem, or I should say from the leaf stem. Only 3 veins. This is the false nettle. Now, the false nettle is distinguished from the nettles in other ways as well, but again, just want to re-emphasize, as long as you remember those 4 distinctions, you'll avoid this plant as well as other poisonous and edible lookalikes. This is another false nettle plant, which is toxic, has 3 veins emanating from the same leaf. Looks like it might be 5 because there's one here and one here, but you see that these 2 veins do not emanate or develop from the main stem. They are developing, or they grow from out of one of these 3 stems here. So that's the difference. So which of the plants we've been discussing is this? Is the nettle, or is this the false nettle? Well, you're right. This is the false nettle. There's only 3 veins emanating from the main or the leaf stem there. Now these are the seeds. They're very tiny. As you can see, they're green. They are also pubescent or hairy. The stem is ordinarily unbranching In other words, you won't find, very rarely will you find, a branch that emanates from this main stem with the branch having additional opposite leaves along its along that particular stem. The edible parts of this plant are the leaves and the stems. To learn how to prepare these plants, visit survivalplantsmemorycourse.com. Urtica Gracilis, nickname Hairy Savage. You'll find there how not only to prepare these parts for eating and for medicine, but also how to harvest them, because they can be hazardous with the stinging hairs that they bear. This has been part 1, and in part 2 I'll be sharing a mnemonic or memory technique to help you commit to memory the most distinguishing characteristics of this plant for identifying purposes. Thank you for watching.